Praise be Jesus and Mary. Continuing our weekly reflections on Franciscan Spirituality today. Again, continuing our discussions on Dogmatic Christocentrism. We're going to speak about Christ today as the supreme glorifier of God. It's through the Word becoming man, taking on a human nature, that the recapitulation and the sublimation of all creation is completed. And all of creation participates in their glorification. So recapitulation means that Christ sums up all of creation in himself, and he becomes the head of all creation. Sublimation means he brings all of creation to God. He brings all of creation into the sublime glory of God himself. Father Matthias Scheben, who we've quoted in previous reflections, says something about this. He says, if all of created nature, so both spiritual and material beings, needs to be represented in this external glorification of God, then the Son of God, as the instrument of this glorification, could not assume only the spiritual nature of the angels, but had to assume our human nature too, because our human nature unites in itself the spiritual and material world. In our earlier reflections, we talked about how Christian spirituality and doctrine of the first centuries fixed its attention mainly on the divinity of Christ. In part, that was because the church had to defend the truth of who Jesus was against the various heresies of the time. Then we mentioned how from St. Bernard of Clairvaux onward, the sacred humanity of Christ became more of a study and a focal point of devotion. The spiritual and mystical movement that began with St. Bernard really culminated in St. Francis, the passionate devotee of Christ crucified as he was. Francis's devotion turned him into a living image of the suffering Jesus, sealed with the very marks of Jesus' passion, sealed with the stigmata. The conformity of St. Francis to Christ is a conformity to his humanity, because we can't really imitate so much the divinity of God, but the humanity of Jesus we can. After St. Francis, we have Franciscans like St. Bonaventure, Friar Giovanni of Cowley, Friar James of Milan. They all wrote spiritual works about the humanity and the suffering of Christ. And even pre-Renaissance Europe took some of its cue from St. Francis, orienting Christian piety more towards the humanity of Jesus, the suffering humanity of the Savior specifically. We see this in the artistic works of Giotto and the paintings of Christ's suffering on the cross. There's a tender devotion to Jesus' sufferings that flows, all that really does flow from St. Francis himself, and the lived experience of seeing someone become like Christ among them. And theologians and doctors of the church at that time began to reflect on and ponder over the theological justifications for this new devotion to Christ's sacred humanity. And they began to exalt the glorification of God and of men through the humanity of Jesus, the God-man. So the humanity of Christ, even though it subsists, even though it has its existence in the person of the Word, so Christ's human nature doesn't have its own human personality. Even though that's true, that doesn't diminish his humanity or his powers or his sentiments. They're all perfect. Christ enjoys all the rights of being man to the point of being the supreme ideal of beauty and of perfection, says John Duns Scotus. The hypostatic union, so the union of God with the nature, human nature, conserves and exalts the created being of Jesus. It doesn't destroy Jesus. In Jesus, we say that there's a metaphysical unity of being and of person, and a duplicity of faculties and of operations which come from his two natures. So what does that mean? Jesus is a divine person, but he has a human will and a divine will. He has a human intellect and a divine intellect too. The Word, the divine person, makes the human actions of Christ his own. He communicates to them a dignity that's superior to every limit. And this human activity of Christ, united to the divine person, who makes that activity his own. So the human activity of Christ supremely glorifies the Trinity outside of the Trinity. Jesus, the God-man, glorified the Father on earth. We hear that many times in the Gospels. He knew him as the only Son can know him, as we read in Matthew 11:27. He made the Father known to the world. Jesus says that in John 17:6, where he says, Father, I have manifested your name. As a creature, he loved and served the Father in the most perfect way possible, as he indicates in John 15:10, saying, I have observed the commandments of my Father and remain in his love. In this way, the humanity of Jesus offers to the Trinity, with the love of the adorable heart of the Savior, the highest and most pleasing homage. He offers the Blessed Trinity the supreme act of religion, of adoration, and of glorification. So we call Christ the universal glorifier. And how does that apply to us? Well, glory, what does that mean for a creature, for us? Glory means seeing God face to face and possessing him for all eternity. By grace, we reach the beatific vision through what's called the lumen gloriae, the light of glory that comes from God. And with that light of glory comes the possession and the enjoyment of God through beatific love. But in order to reach that goal, to reach beatific vision and love too, we've received from God our existence and his grace. The glory we'll enjoy in eternity will correspond exactly to the glory that we have given God in this life. So those who have better known God down here in this life, have more ardently loved him, have served him more faithfully, because of those things, those people make themselves more capable of the vision of God and of the possession of God too. Glorify God down here means you'll be glorified by him up there. And in a sense, in the measure that you've glorified him down here, although he'll give us much more glory than we deserve. Jesus Christ, the supreme glorifier of God, is also the first to be glorified too. To the perfection of his human nature corresponds a highest or supreme grace, and to that grace is joined the highest glory. And as that supreme grace is the ocean to which all creatures endowed with reason draw from, so too the supreme glory of the perfect glorifier of the Father, Jesus, will be the boundless ocean of light and of love in which all of the elect are glorified too. Closing, Duns Scotus says, the glory of Christ in its intensity is greater than the glory of all the saints put together. Therefore, the glory of the elect is ordered to the glory of Christ. So all of the elect are glorified by the mediation of Christ. And in fact, everything was created so that he could elevate everything to glory in himself. Why does everything exist? Everything exists for the glory of God, so that Christ can glorify everything and everyone through his human nature. Christ in his humanity adores and God, and he renders him infinite glory. In his divinity, he glorifies us, since the created, grafted into Christ, is glorified in him, and returns to the Father by means of him. So creation itself isn't just something mundane or profane. Being ordered to Christ and through Christ to glory, our lives acquire great meaning and great significance. We're an ornament of honor to the incarnate Word, and a sign of his dominion and of his kingship too. So let's ask Our Lady today for the grace to take to heart our need, our calling to give God the greatest glory in our lives. The more glory you give him here, the more he'll give you up there. In that way, we show our love for him and will better prepare ourselves for eternity. Praise be Jesus and Mary, now and forever.
If you'd like to grow in love and knowledge of the Immaculate Virgin Mary, consider a subscription to the Missio Immacolate magazine. The Missio is a bi-monthly magazine published by the Franciscans of the Immaculate for over 15 years. Every issue of the Missio features articles about Our Lady's privileges and her mission in the Church and world for the sanctification and conversion of souls. The Missio takes to heart the ancient saying of the Church, De Maria Nunquam Satis, of Mary you can never say enough. You can subscribe online at missiomagazine.com, that's MISSIO, magazine.com, or go to the homepage of airmaria.com. Back issues of the Missio are also available upon request. The Missio is a practical way to behold your mother and take her into your home. Ave Maria.